Tonight, we look at the story that has been told about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey and why so many think her parents guilty, and what this tells us about the America she so briefly lived in.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 33 in the ongoing series. On December 8th, 1997, so almost on the 1-year anniversary of JonBenet's death, none other than Hal Haddon learned that a reporter from the Rocky Mountain News, Lisa Rickman, was about to break a story about the unidentified Hi-Tec shoe imprint that was found next to JonBenet's body. Within an hour, Hal Haddon faxed Lisa Rickman a letter. A copy of this fax appears on page 580 of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. It is from the powerful law firm Haddon, Morgan and Foreman, attorneys at law. It's dated December 8th, 1997. It's addressed to Miss Lisa Rickman, Rocky Mountain News in Colfax Avenue, Denver, Colorado, and it is relating to Ramsey stories. That was what is in the subject line. And this is a quote from Hal Haddon's fax. Bear in mind, at that time they didn't really send emails, right? So Hal Haddon himself faxes the reporter the following. And this is a quote from the fax. Dear Miss Rickman, Pat Furman, another Ramsey attorney who advises me that the Rocky Mountain News under your byline intends to print a story tomorrow which will identify a key item of evidence in the Ramsey investigation. One other news organization has known about this evidence for several months but did not print it because publication of the information would likely cause the killer to dispose of that evidence. It would be irresponsible in the extreme for the news to publish this information. We beg you not to do so. Sincerely, and then it is signed Harold A. Haddon. What do you think the reporter did in response to this letter from Hal Haddon? What do you think of the evidence itself of the Hi-Tec boot? What do you think of the detectives' various positions on their Hi-Tec boot? I'll be giving you the TCRS assessment on that, but before we get to it, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to those who have subscribed in the last day or so and those who've joined Patreon. You can subscribe by clicking on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So in this episode, I'm going to kick off with Rickman's response to Hal Haddon. Then I'm going to take you through the respective points of view of two detectives on this Hi-Tec boot, namely Steve Thomas and Kolar, both detectives. And I'm going to tell you, I personally disagree with their positions on the Hi-Tec boot, on both of their positions. And then I'm going to give you the True Crime Rocket Science take on this, on the intrigue surrounding the Hi-Tec boot print. So we haven't sort of forgotten about Burke Ramsey. We are just going to move away a little bit from that side of the narrative, and we are going to go back to the evidence. We're going to do some deep dives into, first of all, the boot print, which was found in the wine cellar in sort of on a sort of a crusty material. I think it was sort of mold that had either frozen or just sort of formed a powder. It could have also been some cement grit, but it was the sort of dirt that was on the wine cellar floor besides JonBenet's body. That was where this print was found. And we're going to talk about the significance of that. And then in the next episode, 34, we're going to go into the white nylon cord and what it means. And then from there, we are going to go into the duct tape, a deep dive into the duct tape. And then after that, in episode 37, we're going to go further into this deep dive, looking at fingerprints, a pubic hair that was found on JonBenet's blanket, and then Steve Thomas's 17 reasons for why he suspected what he suspected. So let's start off with Rickman's response to Hal Haddon. Bear in mind, it's not every day that a news reporter, that a journalist gets a fax from such an important legal eagle. You can imagine it's quite scary, and he's basically urging her. In fact, he says, we beg you not to do so. We beg you not to publish the story. So it's not really a threat as much as it's an appeal. And as I say, it was sent to Lisa Rickman on December 8th. And how does she respond? Well, she called Furman and told him that Haddon's request had been rejected and that her story would be published as written originally. So she was not going to change anything. She was going to go ahead with the article regardless. Then, and I think this is also from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, around about page 581. And this is a quote from the narrative by Lawrence Schiller. Quote, when Alex Hunter heard that Rickman was going to break the story about the shoe imprint, he also worried about the release of this information. The police had so far been unable to date the imprint. They didn't know whether the owner of the shoe was aware that the print had been left behind, or indeed if it was even connected to the murder. Now, with the public revelation, the owner or the Hi-Tec shoes might destroy them, even if he or she wasn't the killer. If that happened, investigators might never understand this piece of the puzzle, end quote. So there's a lot of drama that is going on about this Hi-Tec boot, and it's important to try and figure out how it fits into the piece, into the pageantry. Is it pageantry? Is this drama justified? Is it almost like jumping up and down, waving a flag, saying, hey, everybody, pay attention to the Hi-Tec shoes? What are we to make of it? And I think a sort of a good way to kind of begin our analysis of this is basically to start with Steve Thomas, Detective Steve Thomas. I've got to tell you, I don't agree with his assessment, but he was quite dismissive of it, basically saying that, you know, for a lot of officers, a lot of law enforcement personnel, Hi-Tec apparel is sort of standard issue. And so Steve Thomas seemed to take the position that the boot print or shoe print wasn't very important evidence, and it may have been left there by some random officer, and that was really his position. So he didn't really take it very seriously, which is totally opposite to Hal Haddon kind of getting his knickers in a twist, getting really, you know, literally saying he's begging the reporter not to publish the story. You also have Alex Hunter, who's really opposed to it happening. What about the Ramseys? Do the Ramseys say anything about this? Now, I want to deal with what Kohler writes in his book, Foreign Faction. I've got the book in front of me, but I want to spend a little more time quoting exactly what Steve Thomas's position was on this. And apparently he made a statement on ABC's Good Morning America. I think it was around about the year 2000. Now, bear in mind, it's taken a full year just for this particular evidence item to enter the public domain. Bear in mind, the ransom note took something like 3/4 of a year. So this boot print right next to the body has taken over a year just to enter sort of public knowledge, right? So a year after that, actually it's more around 2-3 years after that, Steve Thomas basically gives or makes a statement in this regard. And this is what he says. This is a quote from his statement. Let me address the Hi-Tec first. What people had not known previously is that I don't believe that everyone who was in the house on the 26th of December was properly identified. There were firemen, paramedics, rescue personnel, uniformed police officers, detectives, undercover narcs, sergeants, FBI, and others that the year after the fact were still unsure as to who all was in the house that day. There's a strong argument to suggest that the Hi-Tec boot print may have been left by a sightseeing police officer who later did not come forward. Additionally, Hi-Tec is one of the most popular brands of footwear worn by the cops, end quote. Now, it's an interesting position. it seems as though Steve Thomas is kind of being overly defensive, in my view, in the sense that I think that he assumes that it probably was a boot print left by an officer, and he's kind of defending them, just in the sense that, yeah, it could have been one of a lot of people, and who knows. There was like this stampede through the Ramsey home, not only from law enforcement but friends and people who attended Christmas parties, and just lots of people going in and out of the house. So he's just saying it could really be anyone, and so he obviously doesn't regard this boot print, this shoe print, as very important. Okay, so I don't agree with that, and I also don't agree that this Hi-Tec boot print was likely left by law enforcement. It's just that's just an intuition. Then the next position, the next sort of statement on this we get from Kolar, and he makes kind of an interesting point. He comes to it from a different perspective. He basically says, and this is a quote from Foreign Faction, page 48, he says, referring to the Hi-Tec boot print, quote, "Its presence in the cellar could only illustrate that at some point in time, perhaps days or months prior to the discovery of John Bonet's body, someone wearing a Hi-Tec boot had stood in the room." So he kind of takes an almost even more dismissive approach to the boot print or shoe print, basically saying that it doesn't really matter whose it belongs to. It could have belonged. It could have. What matters is when it was left there, and he sort of talks about it could have been left days or months before. I disagree with that as well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the grit actually captures the almost like the stencil of the kind of an imprint of the compass on the Hi-Tec logo, and something like that I don't think would hold itself together for weeks and months, and I'm not even sure if it would last for a couple of days. Something like that would deteriorate just through air currents, through vibrations when someone opens and closes the door, also people walking around, some dust being kicked onto this fragile kind of dirt, grime construction that has been, planted in that space. But I do think indirectly Kolar makes an excellent point, which is, when was this print left behind? And this is one of the probably the most frustrating, not the most frustrating, but one of the more frustrating aspects of the John Benet Ramsey case is there is not a sense that, okay, so in other words, if you are upset that the crime scene was contaminated, I'm talking about John Benet's body, I'm talking about that part of it, and the contamination of other parts of the house. One thing that's hard to understand is, okay, so now you've got a code black, now it is a homicide, so now treat it like a crime scene. So in other words, now close off the wine cellar, and then do your CSI thing inside the wine cellar. And so one of the things you would do is you seal off the area. Now you want to check, okay, who has gone in there. And so obviously you can do that. Theoretically, you can do that when it's at the time, right? In other words, you can find out, okay, who has been in this room. And the answer would have been John Ramsey for sure. And then you could look at his shoes. What shoes has he been wearing? What shoes does he say he's been wearing? Then you could also look at Fleet White. What shoes was he wearing that particular day? And then if there are any other officers that actually entered that room. But if you theoretically sealed off that wine cellar, then you'd only have at that point 2 people contaminating the scene that you know of. Well, what was their footwear? Now, there is actually an interesting comment by Fleet White, and this is also quoted in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, around about 12 pages after this reference to Alex Hunter and Rickman and Hal Haddon. And apparently, and there's a quote from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, in one conversation with detectives, White had even teased the officers. He said, quote, "What would you say if I told you the Ramseys owned Hi-Tec shoes?" End quote. And so what Fleet White is alleging here or contending is that it's not just one member of the family. I mean, that's how I read Ramsey's. He's saying more than one member of the family owned Hi-Tec shoes. And unfortunately, we don't have Fleet White just coming forward and saying, this is the situation, this is what I know. Okay? So I'm going to be dealing with the true crime rocket science position on all this, and what is fascinating is what comes out as fact and something that is attributed to a specific individual in the Ramsey family in a separate court, not a court, well, I guess it's a court hearing and a deposition. And that is sort of in black and white, it's kind of incontrovertible. That's actually staggering, and it's something that very few people are aware of. And it's the reason why I disagree quite strongly with both of these detectives. And we're going to deal with that in the Patreon section. If you haven't joined Patreon, head on to patreon.com/TCRS, and it's on the $2 tier. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time. On August 31st, 2000, the headline of a Boulder Daily Camera article read, "Ramseys give police high-tech boots."